Sounds like a lot of...
Hoopa!
It sounds like a lot of...
Hoopa!
Sounds like a...
Hoopa! Hoopa!
Hoopa! I love this little guy, and he doesn't get talked about much, which I guess makes sense, because he hasn't been topical for like 5 years. Time is ever fleeting. But it feels like even when his movie was the newest one, he didn't get talked about a ton. I mean, the Hoopa movie isn't the best Pokemon movie out there, but it's not the worst. I mean, I'm not saying it's like the top 20 or anything, but like, Hoopa's cool. You can pull gods out of other dimensions, just casually, and people don't seem to understand just how crazy that is. Like, yeah, oh no, it's a big bad Pokemon, but then he's like just able to make an army of big bad Pokemon. That's nuts! And yet, people, if a 5-year-old sized demon you just made friends with a bit ago could rip H.P. Lovecraft elder gods out from under the ocean and into the real world, we would care. But the Pokemon world, it's just another day for Ash. But regardless, if there's a reason to talk about Hoopa or not, let's talk about Hoopa. It's not like there not being a reason hasn't stopped me before. So first, we must look at the obvious part of its design. It has the demon traits, and it's said by the community to be a genie. But the community also seems to think that the 3 Kami Pokemon are genies. So can they really be trusted? But yes, Hoopa is a genie, or a Djinn. And before things get confusing, let's clear that up right now. Genie is simply the anglicized word for Djinn, and putting the D in front of it makes it the Romanized spelling. So they are all referring to the same thing, they're just written out and read differently. Now then, I know a guy who lived in Dubai, and he knows a lot more about these spirits than I. So say hello to KAIHATSU.
Hey there, I'm KAIHATSU, and like Lockstin said, United Arab Emirates born and raised. I like talking about culture and games over on my YouTube channel and analyzing and explaining said cultural stuff. So let's have a look at what a Djinn is. Now, the history of the Djinn is a fascinating one. First of all, their name comes from Jan, the original meaning being to hide or to conceal. Some words that are related to it are Majnun, meaning possessed or crazy, and Jannah, meaning garden or paradise or heaven. Djinn are old mythological beings from the pre-Islamic Middle East. They come from a different dimension or plane of existence and pop into ours every now and then to do things like pranks, cause havoc, steal, or whatever they feel like really. Essentially the same as most fae creatures in ancient Europe. They're simply normal beings from their world, but when they come into ours they have extreme supernatural powers, but they aren't immortal. And at the time they were worshipped and sometimes even feared. In early Persia, they were separated into 2 categories: paris, which are winged, beautiful spirits, and divs, beings that are much like ogres or other beasties of that kind. But then Islam spread throughout the Middle East, and just like with Christianity and Europe, as Lockstin talked about in the Hatterene and Grimm style videos, Islam took some folklore spirits and deities from the pagan cultures before it and incorporated them into Islam, turning them into demons or angels. But mostly demons. And Djinn are no different. Djinn were suddenly demons. Even SHAITAN himself, Satan in the Quran, was believed to be a Djinn by some, and there of course are chants, amulets, and prayers to clean Djinn from a home, kind of like how other churches and beliefs clean houses of spirits or demons with prayers, artifacts, or incense. The Quran even emphasizes comparison between humans and Djinn as taqalan, meaning accountable ones, which means that they have free will and will be judged according to their deeds. So a Djinn that doesn't believe in God or Allah is just considered a demon, while Djinn that do good deeds can become closer to God. In this way, I see a parallel in the Hoopa movie, where by the end of the film, Hoopa learns to behave and be empathic and finally reclaims his full abilities after quite literally seeing the light of Arceus. Also, this may just be me, but Hoopa's catchphrase in the movie, Ale Hoopa Ring, supposedly coming from Ale Oop, sounds at least to me a lot like the takbir, a takbir being the statement Allahu Akbar, though this is usually put into longer phrases and prayers. When one shouts takbir, everyone responds with Allahu Akbar. Unfortunately, this phrase in the West is very misunderstood because Islamic terrorists usually shout it before doing something terrible, when in reality it is just a statement of faith, like a Christian saying, Jesus is love. But one more bit of more solid evidence of inspiration, again coming from the Hoopa movie, is how Hoopa's shadow separates from it and terrorizes everyone, which is a very common belief about the abilities of Djinn. Zubair bin al-Awam, someone who apparently accompanied the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during his lecture to the Djinn, is said to have viewed the Djinn as shadowy ghosts with no individual structure. This lack of structure and appearance is what solidified the belief by scholars that Djinn visit us from another plane of existence to play tricks on us and don't stay around for long. There was also another case with two Islamic scholars where one showed the other a Djinn, and it was described as a shadow on the wall. Basically, the more and more you look into the original beliefs about Djinn, the more clear it becomes that they were a primary source of inspiration for Hoopa.
Thanks for that explanation, KAIHATSU.
You're welcome, Lockstin, no problem.
You can check out his channel here for more culture-based education through a video game lens. I recommend it a lot. But now then, that all explained Hoopa's spirit, supernatural, godlike powers of breaking space-time and being from another dimension and being a trickster who steals things. That's all just literally what a Djinn is. And likewise, that also explains the ogre or demon-looking traits. But what about those rings and the bottle? Well, the rings are easy. The story of Aladdin is basically what really got Djinn into the mainstream Western world. And actually, in classic Disney fashion, the actual story of Aladdin is quite a bit different from the Disney movie. First things first, Aladdin is Chinese, like the character of Aladdin himself. He's Chinese. And his dad dies, leaving his mother and him alone. Then a sorcerer comes along and tricks Aladdin and his mother into thinking that he is the brother of their late father, and he tricks Aladdin and makes him go into the cave to retrieve the oil lamp. Aladdin gets the lamp and has a magic ring that the sorcerer loaned him after he was double-crossed, each one containing a Djinn that would grant him a wish once per day. So yes, the ring had the Djinn, and that's one of the reasons why rings and hoops and such are associated with Djinn. But there is another one. King Solomon used a magic ring to control Djinn. He would brand them with it to make them his slaves, which also goes into the whole subservient genie thing, why they're essentially slaves. At one point, King Solomon took a bath and removed the ring, which then got stolen by a Djinn, who then took Solomon's throne, but eventually God compelled the Djinn to throw the ring into the sea. Solomon later found it and punished the Djinn by imprisoning him in a bottle. And this then became commonplace as a way of dealing with bad Djinn, trapping them inside of bottles, lamps, and jars. Which of course, Hoopa references by having a bound and unbound form based on how much of its energy is currently trapped inside of its bottle. But many stories involving Djinn took inspiration from these, including the tale of Sinbad, one of the stories from 1001 Nights, where a fisherman finds a jar in the ocean and opening it reveals an angry Djinn. Then, of course, there's Aladdin, featuring genies in lamps and rings and such. Both the original with Chinese Aladdin and also the more modern interpretation that revitalized the story in pop culture, Disney's animated feature. But speaking of Chinese, in Chinese mythology there's a little rugrat named Nezha, and his story is very important to Hoopa. Trust me. Nezha was born a 4-year-old boy, and one time, while playing in a creek, he accidentally shook an entire palace belonging to WUKONG, a dragon god. Angry about this, the dragon god sent a scout to kill the child, but then Nezha just played with him a bit too rough and killed him. So the dragon god sent his own son. Same scenario. Nezha is just having a blast, thinking they're playing, and he kills him because he played too rough. It's already a bit reminiscent of Hoopa in the movie already, right? Hoopa is just a little trickster who wants to have fun and sometimes doesn't realize he's overdoing it and hurting people. But the similarities don't stop there. Nezha's main weapon is a bladed ring called the Universe Ring. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Nezha eventually defeated WUKONG, but had to sacrifice himself to do so. But like many heroes and shonen protagonists, he got better. Specifically, his teacher, Wenchu, revived the boy's spirit and also gave him a whole bunch of stuff, like his wind-fire wheels and his fire-tipped spear weapons. Those wheels allow him to magically fly around and stuff. And some of that other and stuff is that, like many Chinese mythological figures, he could transform a lot. And Nezha's main form had him transformed into a gigantic demon with 6 arms. And his hoop weapon. Okay, we're getting a little bit too obvious now. But Nezha's most famous opponent might also play a role in inspiring Hoopa. More specifically, parts of the Hoopa movie. Nezha had many opponents, but few were as great as the great sage Heaven's Equal, or as most people know him, Sun Wukong. You know who Sun Wukong is. It's the inspiration of Infernape and Goku, but for our purposes today, we are going over some of his story too. Sun Wukong was a monkey born from a rock. He grew up surrounded by monkeys that praised him as king because he was powerful and just born magically from a rock. He learned things like immortality and cloning and a bunch of stuff, but after a while he became too big for his britches and wanted more, even taking his iconic magic staff and armor from Wukong, before Nezha killed him, of course. Sun Wukong got super full of himself, very, very cocky. I mean, he was defeating armies sent by the gods left and right, literally Dynasty Warrior style. And at one point, he even defeated, but couldn't kill, Nezha unbound. Nothing could take him down a notch until he met this dude who challenged him to escape his grasp. If Sun could jump out of his hand, then Sun wins. Seems easy enough, so he agrees, and being the over-the-top guy that he is, he's like, I'm gonna do this, and he flies all the way to literally the end of the universe. Which is surrounded by pillars, by the way. And he's so full of himself there that he writes Sun Wukong was here on the pillar and then pees on it and then flies back to the dude to gloat about how much he actually won. Turns out he didn't win though, because that man's name was Buddha. He was so enlightened and one with the universe that he is the universe. He raises his hand and shows a little Sun Wukong was here, and it smelled like monkey pee. Wow. Now, somewhat similarly, Hoopa came to the ancient Pokemon world from nothing. He just appeared. Like Sun Wukong just appeared from a rock, and was praised constantly, and feared, revered, praised for his mighty power, but eventually, like Sun Wukong, Hoopa got bored with its power and just starts picking fights with people and gods for no reason really, sometimes even summoning gods to fight exclusively, or in Hoopa's case, legendary Pokemon, and both of them picked one fight that they had an actual really hard time with, but still ultimately won. Sun with Nezha, and Hoopa with Regigigas. It isn't until an even higher power steps up that they finally stop. Buddha, in the case of Sun Wukong, and the follower of Arceus, and then even literally Arceus, at the end of the Hoopa movie. And one last bit here, Sun had a ring-shaped crown put on him eventually, which could grow and shrink. It basically forced him to behave around certain people who could make it shrink to hurt or even kill him. He was bound. Similarly, Hoopa gets bound and also has a load of gold rings all over him. But hang on, with all of this, am I saying that one of the very few, most obviously Middle East inspired Pokemon is actually Chinese? Well, yes. Yes, I am. But it can be both. Especially when you consider all of that confusion about Aladdin. Many of the stories in the Arabian collection of stories known as the Book of 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights, were added much, much later after the book was originally published. And the story of Aladdin, one of the most famous in that book today, is one of them. It's not anywhere in the original book, and we don't have any hard evidence of where it originally came from either. But we do know that Aladdin was originally Chinese himself, and that the story takes place in a Chinese city. However, most of the people in the story are Muslims, and the merchant in the story is Jewish. The ruler is still referred to as a sultan rather than an emperor, and of course there's the Genie, the Djinn. So clearly, this story, which gave us the more modern pop culture interpretation of genies, is very linked to both cultures. And that's likely due to the Silk Road, a trade route that was massively important to the Bronze Age world. It directly connected China with the Middle East, and on top of trading goods, there was also, of course, the trading of traditions, culture, and stories. The modern theory of where Aladdin came from is just that. An Arabian traveler on the Silk Road was told the tale towards the Chinese end of the road, and continued passing it along, possibly adapting it as they traveled. Eventually, the story reached the Middle East, and was eventually added to the Book of 1001 Nights. There are even some theories that point to Turkestan as the city the story takes place in. which is pretty close to the direct middle of the Silk Road. So yes, these cultures were very intertwined for a big chunk of history, and they had a lot of influence on each other and the world around them. And it's all quite awesome in the literal definition of the word. It's awe-inspiring. And that's the origin of Hoopa. Check out KAIHATSU's channel, and until next time, you never stop using your noggin, and let me know what other Pokemon are kind of underappreciated and never talked about that probably have deep origins worthy of a video.